Hello, my name is Paul Henry, Security and Forensic Analyst at Lumension. Welcome to our Patch Tuesday update for April 2013. Well, Patch Tuesday is not too taxing for IT this month, despite a heavy patch count. There are a total of 9 bulletins, 2 critical, 7 important. While 9 at first glance might seem like a lot, there are a few pieces of good news this month. First, there's only 2 critical bulletins, and most of the patches are rated as important. Second, most of the impact is on the legacy codebase rather than the current codebase that had been impacted more than usual over the last few months. If your system is running the latest and greatest version of any vendor software, as it should always do, you're going to be running the most secure version of that vendor software. Microsoft is not your biggest issue this month, even despite the 9 patches. Now, as we enter into our first patch of Q2, it's worthwhile to look at the numbers. This year, Microsoft has issued 35 bulletins so far, with an average of almost 9 per month, of which 3 are critical and 6 are important. Comparing that to 2012, where there were 28 bulletins by April, averaging 7 a month. Though the overall number is up from 2012, the number of average critical vulnerabilities is holding steady at about 3, while important vulnerabilities make up the difference, averaging 4 throughout 2012. With the number of important bulletins increasing, but critical holding steady, we can infer that Microsoft gets better every year at finding low-risk, low-impact issues and getting them fixed in a timely manner. And this is, of course, good news. Before diving into the patches, there are a few Microsoft issues to note, including today's Flash update. More importantly, this month marks the 1-year death clock start for Windows XP. In April 2014, Microsoft is going to end support for Windows XP. If you haven't already, it's really beyond time to start thinking about migrating to a new OS if you're still running XP. Now for the April patches. Your first priority is MS13028. This is a use after free issue in all versions of IE. This is one of the few bulletins this month that has a critical impact on the current codebase, hitting Windows 8, RT, and 7 with critical remote code execution issues. It's a pretty run-of-the-mill bug for the most part. However, there is a defense in depth issue here that was not assigned a CVE because it's dependent on the user having Java 6 or older installed. Given the number of issues Java's had lately, hopefully no one is still running old versions of Java. If you haven't updated the software to 7.0 or newer, please do so immediately. Java 7 has an automatic update feature that will help keep machines secure with minimal effort from the users as we wait for HTML5 to be ready for broader use. We recommend that this bulletin be your first patch priority. You should update IE while you're at it. MS1329 is your next priority. It affects RDP, but is not the type of issue we typically see in Windows RDP. This is a problem with the Windows RDP ActiveX control, so it can only be launched through a browser running ActiveX. However, it affects all versions of the RDP client. One of the important things here is the server SKUs are rated moderate, but client SKUs are ranked critical. The ActiveX control can be disabled for those who don't want to use it, which is really a great way to mitigate the risk of this vulnerability. Now, MS13030 is an information disclosure issue in SharePoint. This is an information disclosure issue in SharePoint 2013 only. If a user has multiple tenants on SharePoint, the information disclosure issue could potentially allow an authenticated user to view another user's documents within SharePoint. MS13031 is a Windows kernel elevation of privilege issue. There are 2 CVEs addressed here that would allow a local low-rights user to be elevated to system-level access. One of the interesting things to note is while one CVE affects all versions of Windows, the other affects only Windows 8 and is the result of faster, newer hardware for the Windows 8 system. Now, MS13032 fixes a denial of service vulnerability in Active Directory affecting all versions of Active Directory and ADAM, which is the Active Directory application module that serves as the lightweight version of Active Directory. Now, an attacker in the Active Directory domain could send a malformed LDS request. When the request is processed, the server becomes stuck in a memory loop. The server will eventually recover when the request is processed, but an attacker could continue sending requests to sustain this denial of service attack. This is an important vulnerability, but if you're running an Active Directory server, you really need to update this quickly, so push it up higher in your priority list if you're running AD. Next is MS13033, which affects CSRSS, a core Windows component. This is a memory corruption vulnerability that would allow a low-right user system-level access, but it does not affect newer versions of Windows. MS13034 is an elevation of privilege vulnerability in Windows Defender on Windows 8. An unquoted path error would allow an attacker to change the default mode string or load order, effectively allowing the attacker to point to different binaries to load instead of what's intended by the operating system. This would require an attacker had already loaded a malicious binary onto the machine, which is why it's ranked important rather than critical. By quoting the path, the binaries would be locked and the risk would be mitigated. MS13035 is an HTML sanitization issue. We've had a couple of these over the last year. The last time Microsoft updated this was MS12066. Typically, an HTML sanitization issue needs to be cleaned up across multiple products. This one is no different. It impacts Office, InfoPath, and SharePoint Server 2012. MS13036 is a kernel mode driver issue, similar to the other kernel mode driver issues we've had over the last few months. There are 4 CVEs in this patch. 3 allow a local user to use kernel raised conditions to elevate to system access. The 4th CVE is a moderate elevation of privilege issue, which is really unusual for Microsoft. To leverage this CVE, an attacker would need to be an admin, which really removes the need to leverage it in the first place. Alternately, a low-rights user would need to be a specifically crafted external device, such as a USB stick. Now, last month, Microsoft had their interesting USB bug that really got a lot of attention. This is nothing like that. Last month's bug allowed computers to attack regardless of the user's login status. This month's bug only allows a logged-in, active system to be attacked, so logon credentials are in fact required. There are easier ways for attackers to get in. Now, outside of Microsoft this Patch Tuesday period, as I noted in the beginning, Microsoft is not your biggest problem this month, as it hasn't been for a long time. For once, Java's not a new problem this month. However, there are a few other interesting stories going around I want to call out. First is the very concerning and ongoing issue with Apache known as Dark Leech. The Apache server software is apparently being used to facilitate drive-by malware attacks. The attack is very dynamic, randomly serving malicious links to select users, but not others. The inconsistency of this is making it very difficult for the security community to detect, let alone resolve the issue. It's an incredibly stealthy piece of malware, and despite the fact that attacks date all the way back to August, there is still no concrete information about mitigation. We'll be hearing a lot more about Dark Leech over the next few months as we learn more about it. In the meantime, keep your security software up to date and be on the lookout for the attack. I'm also hearing a lot about DDoS again this month, thanks to the attack on Spamhaus, the largest DDoS attack in history. It's being credited with attempting to, in fact, break the internet. Though cybersecurity attacks are occasionally blown out of proportion, in this case, that's exactly what the attack tried to do. It used misconfigured DNS servers to generate and amplify traffic for use in the DDoS attack. This has been our Patch Tuesday update for April 2013. Thank you for listening.